Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. For those of y'all who are joining us on Facebook Live, we're so happy that we can connect with you in this digital age. For those of you who are on the webinar with us, thank you so much for signing up and joining in on this conversation. We're so happy and so glad to have you here and participating in this conversation. So as you all can see, we have some beautiful faces already lined up here, ready to get, this little conversation going. So I want to start off with just letting you all know that today is it's a day that we have to have um, as the country is shifting. Um, there is a lot of uncertainty right now. There is a lot of questioning about what parts of our culture should we continue practicing, what traditions should we continue, what needs to be changed, what needs to be altered. And we as peoples, know that in order to survive in this world, we have to change with the flow. And that is not something that is new to us. We are very familiar with the shift adapt. If they say we can't go outside, well, we bring outside inside. Our cultures demand that. So that, today is our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., César Chavez. Normally, we refer to this as a luncheon, but this year, we've got some things that are changing, as I said, and so this year it is a call to action for 2021. So the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. César Chavez Call to Action is named for two cultural giants who led nonviolent, peace-centered movements for the civil rights of African Americans and Mexican farm workers, respectively. Our 2021 keynote speakers are political commentator, journalist, and scholar activist, Rosa Alicia Clemente, and activist and organizer, Keiajah Gabbrell. Join us as we reflect on the legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez and dream up a new normal in the face of the dual pandemics of race-based oppression and the coronavirus. In light of the global pandemic and with care for the safety of our Ashe family, this year's event is virtual, and we have asked that people that signed up on the Eventbrite pay what they can. Now that we are streaming live, we invite everyone to go to our wonderful website that is Afrofuturistic to the core, and feel free to hit that donate button. Feel free to become a member. We love social connection in any way, and we appreciate any gifts that folks have to offer. So I want to kick things off by introducing our Chief Creative Officer, Frederick Wood Delahousse, who is going to open us up with a land acknowledgement as we do here at Ashe.
Thank you so much, Morgan. And again, shout out to your beautiful hair. Greetings, family. We deliver a land acknowledgement to affirm the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition that is white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of neighborhood sovereignty, of cultural rights, and as a small step toward equitable relationships and reconciliation. So as we gather on the native ancestral lands of the Attakapas, Ishak, the Caddo, the Chitimacha, the Choctaw, the Homa, the Natchez, and Tunica peoples, as well as the Petite nations, we also recognize the Alabama, Biloxi, Cosada, and Ofo peoples, and the others who were pushed into Louisiana from their ancestral lands. We invite all of those in attendance to learn with us about the native and indigenous peoples, histories, and present-day communities in Louisiana and around the world. We do a land acknowledgement not only to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism, but also to acknowledge the non-Western ways of knowing that holistically link mind, body, and spirit, and link the human and non-human ways of knowing. We acknowledge that the space we are in, the land that we are on, are a part of who we are and how we know the world. And it also allows us to raise the questions of what it means to live in a post-colonial world. What did it take for us to get here? How can we be accountable for our part in that history? Questions about whose knowledge gets to be named, whose knowledge gets to be honored, validated, legitimized, and whose knowledge gets to be erased. It is acknowledgement that the space that we inhabit shapes what we know, what we consider to be that knowledge, and how knowledge is constructed, We give thanks to all the nations and tribes who were the original inhabitants of this land and once occupied what is now Louisiana, and some of the original inhabitants of the Atchafalaya Basin, Mississippi River Delta, and the Gulf Coast. For all of them, we say Ashe. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our Chief Executive Officer, the phenomenal, the incomparable, the incredible Society Divine Ecclesiastes.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us right now. One of the wonderfully brilliant things about this transition to the virtual world is that we are able to have our folks from all over the world join us for events that, were just in person. As much as we miss the in-person, we really appreciate this ability to expand our audience across the African diaspora. So Ashe Cultural Arts Center is a 22-year-old institution in the New Orleans community that is committed to the celebration and development of the people, places, and philosophies of the African diaspora. We are all about empowering artists and culture bearers and empowering communities in equitable development. We are about change all day, every day, and which is why this call to action today is especially important in the memories of our great change agents, Martin Luther King Jr. and César Chavez. It is my delight to bring a conversation to you today from two remarkable change agents in this day, in this moment, who are leading and inspiring and encouraging just awesome, work all over the world. Just to hear their voices fills you with an energy with which you must act. So Rosa Clemente, I've had the honor of sharing virtual platforms with her before, and when I tell you she's just electrifying. And I asked her today, particularly because as we are talking about solidarity communities and such things, what are the real ways that we build bridges between one another, and the real ways that we advance and activate and advocate across, I don't want to say across cultures, because it's, we are one in so many ways, but across barriers, right? And then KJ, when I saw her, my daughter sent me a video of her, and it gave me all of the belief. And when I saw her video, I recently, had a conversation about the youth and where they were going and what they were doing, how they weren't listening, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember hearing those things about myself, right? And so to see her leading this new generation, like two things she said, as I looked up her bio. One, I'm a activist, not a model. Hello. And two, I'm not nice, right? And to have someone of her age infusing that energy into our culture at this time, we all have to do everything that we can to support her, to increase and enlarge her platform, and to encourage all of our youth to join in hands. And so with that, I would love to ask Rosa to begin her sharing with us today.
I want to thank Ashe Cultural Center and everybody who put the event together, and for all those that watching, and also acknowledge that many people have been affected by COVID-19, either someone in your family, a close friend, or yourself. I think it's important that we remember, and we'll have to do a lot of remembrance when this virus begins to seed of how many, particularly African American, Latino people have been lost to this pandemic. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Frantz Fanon said that. And Assata Shakur, who has political asylum in Cuba, tells us, nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them. As an organizer, we all have stories. It's our stories and then bring us together into spaces. My story begins in the South Bronx in 1972, the home of hip hop. I did not grow up in a movement household. I did not grow up understanding politics and studying history. But I knew I had a great sense of pride as a Puerto Rican. But even then, I didn't know the history of my people, what happened to our nation. I did not know why we were made a US colony. I didn't understand why we were American citizens. I did not know we were a colony. I did not know of the freedom fighters like Pedro Albizu Campos, Lolita Lebron, Filiberto Ojeda Frias, Ramon Betances, all that fought for Puerto Rico to be free. Many were hunted, attacked, assassinated, incarcerated for fighting for Puerto Rico to be free. I also did not know that between 1939 and 1957, 1/3 of Afro-Boricua women, Black Puerto Rican women on the island was sterilized by Johnson & Johnson. Every birth control method that we have now was first used and experimented on the women in Puerto Rico. Those women themselves did not know that these doctors have placed an IUD in them and left it. Many began to feel pains. Many died because they were poisoned from the inside from the IUD. That same doctor would then find refuge at Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx. As the Black Panther Party was rising, the Young Lords Party was rising, the Black Liberation Army was rising. There was a doctor in Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx that went on to sterilize 30,000 more African American and Puerto Rican women. I had to go to college to find that out. But specifically, I had to take Black studies, Puerto Rican studies, feminist studies, to begin to understand why I had not learned anything political or historical about not only Puerto Ricans, but African American, Native American, Asian, Muslim, and other Afro-Latinx people. In my sophomore year, I went to a meeting of the Albany State University Black Alliance. I asked the person running the organization, Derek Westbrook, I don't think I belong here. I'm not African. He said, you do belong here. You're a person of African descent. Let me break it down for you. And 2 hours later, we spoke for 2 hours after the meeting. And as Drake rhymes, I started at the bottom to get to that top. And that top was beginning to know and understand who I truly was, but also to understand why my history of resistance, our history of resistance, was kept from us. I had to start rooting out the internalization of white being right. I had to truly decolonize my mind. I had to read books. I had to study. I participated in hour-long debates at our main meetup spot, the campus center. I remember going to classes, but what I remember the most is the times where we as Black and brown people would just gather and brothers and sisters were dropping knowledge from where they were located. As a woman, I also had to root out the internalized patriarchy, as well as it begin to deal with the sexual assaults that I had faced when I was 15, in my first year at SUNY Albany. I had to cleanse my mind, my body, and my spirit. I began to understand the trauma inflicted on me in my childhood, but the trauma inflicted on our people. By the end of the sophomore year, I ran and became the first Puerto Rican woman president of the Albany State University Black Alliance. That year, I also changed my major from political science to Africana studies. I enrolled in 2 classes, Puerto Rican history and the history of the civil rights movement. I would meet my first mentor in the struggle for justice, Professor Collier Clark. Then I would meet the incomparable Professor Dr. Vivian Verdell Gordon, the first Black woman that talked about a tri-oppression, that Black women have the oppression of patriarchy, of capitalism, and of violence. And Dr. Gordon was my mentor till she passed away. It was then that I transitioned from just being another Puerto Rican from the Bronx and Westchester County. I took leadership classes, became involved in anything and everything I could as a student, met comrades to this day that are still my comrades. Those 4 years at SUNY Albany made me who I am. They taught me to claim my space. I would have never become an organizer, independent journalist, or a 2008 vice presidential candidate. I also became fearless because what I learned fed my soul. I'd learned about the invasion of our respective homelands, but those invasions and those takeovers were headed on by the United States. From Puerto Rico to Panama, Jamaica, Haiti, Somalia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Hawaii. I read the words of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. I listened to the words of Chuck D and Public Enemy, KRS-One, the Diggable Planners, the Welfare Poets, Dead Prez. The more I learned, the angrier I got. That anger led me to my own personal transformation. And through this, I became a critical thinker, debater, and challenger to the white supremacist domination of our people. I've never looked back. As I continue to pursue my studies in Black Studies, I went to Cornell University and got my master's under the tutelage of Dr. James Turner. Dr. James Turner, along with Professor Gordon, although she had passed away by the time I got to Cornell, had created the national NCBS, the National Center for Black Studies. But they had also created a cadre of young people like us. And they all expected us to use our scholarship, not for just us, not to just have a Cornell degree or a SUNY degree, but to use the scholarship on behalf of our community. As I pursued my PhD, which I'm completing now at the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of UMass Amherst, Professor Bracy told me, your lived experience is as important as what's in a book. Your lived experience is why we resist. We're alive because we resist. And to be a person of African descent is to always be celebrated. The last 7 to 8 years, a new generation who grew up under an Obama administration where many felt things would get better, they didn't get better. The beginning of Barack Obama's, the first months of Barack Obama's presidency started with the assassination of Troy Davis, a young brother in Atlanta who should have never been put to death. But that became a very real organizing moment for many of us. And then we see Trayvon Martin killed, and we see Sandra Bland, and we see Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and we see the Bahamas literally wiped off the map, and we see children in cages, and we see ice raids in Mississippi. We see water is poisoned in Flint. We see what happened in 2005 in New Orleans, the Gulf Coast, because of the Hurricane Katrina, but also the levee breach in New Orleans. When Standing Rock happened, many of us supported that. When Eric Garner was saying he can't breathe, we carry that with us. When Ferguson rebelled and Baltimore rebelled and Charlotte rebelled and now Minneapolis, Rochester, and hundreds of cities around the country in this last year, as well within a global pandemic. We also unfortunately had to deal with new deaths. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Daniel Perdue, Jacob Blake. A brother was shot in Texas 2 days ago while he was standing in front of his house. Women now, we are hearing, are being held in ICE detention, are undergoing hysterectomy and gynecological exams and having their uteruses removed without their knowledge. This is what this government has always done, experimented on Black and brown bodies. It starts with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and continues to go on. But we have to be very clear now that what happened last Wednesday wasn't just about white nationalists wanting to take over and assassinate politicians or take over the US Capitol. They want to get rid of us. This is about whiteness. Whiteness is toxic. Whiteness should be declared as a public health emergency because we are not able to live our full lives. People are out here afraid to go outside, to go to the bodega, to go to their friend's house. outside part of it, yes, COVID, but the larger part of it is that we are now under siege in every capital. I live in Albany, New York, and last night we got a text alert from the city telling us that because of credible threats of terroristic attacks, that the students that were in school, my daughter is not, she is at home, but the students that in school, they canceled in-school learning for the next week because the threats are so credible that the superintendent, she did the right thing, a Black sister, said, we want you to be safe, we want your families to be safe, stay in the house. And when I got that, I was infuriated because we're the people, we have to stay in the house and be held hostage to white supremacists. We've seen how quickly in our communities they come and grab protesters, activists, assassinate them, incarcerate them, make them political prisoners. And you can't find with all your resources who these people are. Well, part of why they can't find them is because there are FBI agents and police officers and military that are part of that insurrection. Who can anyone trust? It was disheartening to hear Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez say, I don't know if the person I'm going to sit next to when the Congress is back in full session is a Republican that sent people in here to kill me. That's our reality. That is our reality. So what we have to do as organizers is go first to where the problems are and talk to the people. People that are closer to the problems have the solutions. People like me and many of us have to understand we do have privilege. The privilege for me to work is real, but I have a husband, and I don't call them essential workers, I call them sacrificial workers, that is out there 5 days a week as an essential worker so that we can have good health care. We need now a reimagination of what we want our world to look like. We need to understand clearly that everything that happens here is affecting the rest of the world. Although this maniac will only be in office for 5 days, who knows what he will do in 5 days? And it's not feeling like you're just, it's a feeling of lockdown, but it's psychological traumatic, the traumatic psyche. And there's so much trauma in our communities right now with everything that's been happening and now this. So as a historian, what has always get me comfort is that our history began before colonization, enslavement, capture, and genocide. That before the ugly tentacles of white capitalism and imperialism reached us, we have a history that predates all of these systemic oppressions inflicted upon us as African and indigenous people all over the world. What gives me comfort is always the people. We are a diasporic people. We are part of transnational collective communities. We must begin to tell, particularly our young people, that the American project is a failure. The American project begins with the kidnapping and enslavement of African people, the forced chattel slavery of these people for 400 years, the purposeful killing and extermination of indigenous peoples, the taking of their land, the exploitation of migrant labor, the denial of equality for women. The founding fathers did not even want their women in their lives to be free. So my time is up, and I will just wrap up with a solution. The solution now is to take the words of Robert and Mabel Williams: self-defense, self-determination, self-respect. We have to be very clear now that we should be organizing in what community we are in right now. Do you know your neighbors? Do you know how to get somewhere? Do you know to get somewhere without a phone, without a GPS? Is everybody on your block eating? Where are the elders? You know, all of that is critically important. But we also have to understand that voting has never gotten us free. Voting is a tactic that we use, and sometimes we use it well. But I do remind people that some of our greatest leaders were never voted into office. Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B., Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Nat Turner, Lolita LeBron, Albizu Campos, Assata Shakur, Malcolm X, Jalil Muntekin, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Oscar Lopez, David Gilbert, Herman Bell, Russell Schultz, Leonard Peltier. Many of these are still political prisoners and are being held just of vengeance, because the state never forgets, but they always want us to forget. So as Kwame Ture said, the job of the conscious is to make the unconscious know that they're unconscious. I truly believe that this state and its actors want us to march to our deaths willingly, but we will not do that. We will not consent. You will not get rid of us. We resist is how we exist. And the final thing, the words of Frederick Douglass. Let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other turmoils to silence. It must do this or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet depreciate agitation, are men and women who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, a physical one. It may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words, blows, or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Thank you.
I just say, if we were in person, we would be on our feet, stomping, clapping, hollering, amen, amen, and ashaying right now. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, sister. Thank you, thank you. Oh, and now I would like to invite our sister KJ to open us up to her word.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm KJ. I'm a 20-year-old activist and grassroots organizer based here in Kansas City, Missouri. I rose to prominence after a video of me at the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners meeting went viral. And I've kind of had this national spotlight and attention on myself for a few months. So thank you to you all for allowing me this opportunity to speak. And thank you to anyone who is taking the time and energy out of their day to listen to us speak and to gather here as we honor the legacies of Martin Luther King Jr. and César Chavez. So today I'm going to talk about Grassroot God Politics and Capitalism. So Grassroot God Politics is a term that I came up with myself. And it's this kind of unknown, unwritten rules that activists are supposed to abide by that we don't know that we're supposed to abide by. And a few of them include kind of this humble mindset, this stay low, stay unknown, stay unvalued, stay untreasured, work towards liberation without people knowing that you are working towards liberation. And it's complete crap. That's the only thing that I'll say on that. As a younger activist, as someone who has literally had to fight for a voice in this movement, who has constantly been subject to silencing, has constantly been subject to kind of a complete subjugation of my voice and a complete kind of devaluing of younger activist voices and a lot of gatekeeping that occurs. I'm just here to encourage any young people who could be watching to definitely keep pressing to have a voice, keep pressing to be heard, keep pressing to be valued. as your voice is valuable in this movement. And oftentimes our predecessors are encouraging us to join the movements, but they encourage us to show up in ways that they find pleasing to them. They don't like the violence. They don't like the chants that say, F the police, but we all want to reach liberation. And I don't think that any form of liberation can come without some, exactly what Rosa said, without some form of struggle. It has to, people have to be jailed. We have to be arrested. We have to go through certain things to have our voices heard. So if you're young and you're watching this, like, I definitely just want to encourage you to join a movement, join a grassroots organization, and stay tapped into the work, and don't let anyone speak over you. I can't even count the amount of times where I've sat silent in a Zoom meeting and I had an idea for an action, or I had something valuable to say, and I just thought that no one wanted to hear it. I thought that, I was displeasing of how I was showing up. I thought that, maybe we're going about it the wrong way. Maybe we shouldn't be protesting. Maybe we should be focusing on policy reform. And I quickly learned I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can go and protest at the mayor's house, and I can also push for a policy reform on the same day. It's not exclusive. So definitely stay rooted and grounded in that, and just show up in whatever capacity you can, and that's right to you. I showed up very unapologetically, and I won't even lie, I received a lot of flack for it in this movement space. A lot of people weren't pleased with me being a loud young Black woman. And, I was excluded from a lot of meetings out of fear of scaring the mayor. And literally, like, I was in a meeting about that a week prior to going viral, and people were like, well, we wanted to invite you to this meeting with the mayor, but we wanted him completely comfortable and you make him uncomfortable. And then a matter of days later, I go viral for making an entire board of people uncomfortable. So show up unapologetically, show up without questioning, and don't let anyone silence your voice or, attempt to stifle you and your movement, because we're valuable and we're needed. And this is the last generation. I don't think a lot of people understand that sense of urgency that we have, and that is kind of vindicating to us. This is the last generation that will endure this. My children will not be protesting. So it's a matter of us, we get this done now, or I don't see a future for America. I don't see a future existing. Even today, I just spent the last week in Washington, D.C., and we watched the police prepare for violence at the hands of white supremacists. And they prepared in a completely different way. They were blocking off streets, just being so preventative, making sure that they wouldn't actively have to hurt any white people for trying to breach these places. Meanwhile, we watched cops body slam women, pepper spray, mace, tase us, like, especially in DC, where it's like they are actively violent against protesters, against activists, against organizers. So keep showing up and keep the faith. And change really does only come when people are uncomfortable. And I had to try to explain this to a lot of my comrades over the summer who kind of didn't see the value in us not disrespecting our public officials, but holding them accountable in a public manner, which some will definitely try to misconstrue as disrespect. People only get up if they're uncomfortable. So if you're sitting in a position for 10 hours and your leg hurts and you're uncomfortable, you're going to get up and change around and move around to make yourself comfortable. Same thing can be said about the government. They don't do anything unless there's public scrutiny and public pressure behind it. They didn't want to issue any stimulus checks until people got on Twitter and literally started demanding. And even now, whereas our $2,000 stimulus checks were promised, they're now being comped to $1,400 to make up for the $600 that we received earlier in the month, in the middle of a global pandemic that's been happening for nearly a year now, where hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions are unemployed, and we see what our government chooses to allocate its resources to at a time like this, where they spend millions of dollars sending FBI and CIA and the Army to Washington, D.C. As a result of white people, and us poor people of color on the ground feel the impact of that. And we're the ones constantly facing eviction, constantly facing houselessness in this pandemic, and we yet again have our voices stifled and the things that we need overlooked by white supremacists and their actions. So definitely keep the faith. And the second part of what I wanted to talk about today, and I'm sorry, but I'm geared more towards youth, as I have a lot of impact on people who are closer to my age. So a lot of my message is geared towards them. Denounce capitalism in all its forms. To any young person out there today, we don't need capitalism. And for someone who may not understand what capitalism is the system in which we reside. We claim to have a mixed market system here in America. America is the most prominent example of capitalism that you will ever see in the world, where we have people like Jeff Bezos who are allowed to exist. And we also have people who sleep on the ground in 0-degree weather, who are allowed to sleep on the ground in 0-degree weather as a result of our government constantly choosing money and financial prominence over human lives. So please denounce capitalism in all its forms. I was in your shoes prior to being active in these political spaces. I wanted Gucci, I wanted Louis Vuitton, I wanted all of these different brands that I couldn't pronounce and definitely couldn't afford. And I had such plans. I was like, I'm going to DoorDash for 80 hours a week to make sure that I can afford it. You don't need to DoorDash 80 hours a week to make sure you can afford it, when there are people sleeping out on the streets, and a lot of people on Twitter in particular. This angers a lot of us as Black people, as we have constantly been taught to value money over our own lives. And we've constantly seen a newer form of representation. Now we have Black billionaires, and LeBron James can exist in today's society. And we've kind of been taught that that is liberation, that our representation in society is liberation. And it's not. Our liberation won't come in the form of money. It won't come in the form of Gucci. It won't come in the form of more Black women on Vogue magazine cover. Our liberation is going to come from us on the ground, in the streets, us mutual aid organizers, and all of us who show up for our communities. And it's very contradictory to be claiming to care for the people and walk in $2,000 shoes past houseless people in Manhattan to even get to a Gucci store. So please study up on communism or socialism or on any form of anything that's centered around human beings. We are humans, and it's time that we start to acknowledge our humanity and not place our value on what we can contribute to this capitalistic system, but how we can show up. I took an immense amount of value in how many hours a week I could work while going to high school. I used to brag on Snapchat. I just worked a 60-hour work week. Y'all are broke, catch up. Meanwhile, I was barely bringing home $600 after that 60-hour work week. So let's start to place less value on what we can contribute or what our work is and what we can live for. I want to live for myself. I want to live for my people and my community. I don't want to base my value on what I can contribute and what possessions I can attain and how much money I have. And we today, unfortunately, are so deeply rooted in capitalism. So if you are a young person out there who is not aware, please read, please educate yourself. There are so many resources out there for us to unlearn, because we can't possibly attempt to dismantle the system without addressing capitalism, which is the reason why we were brought over here in the first place, why our predecessors were dragged from Africa over here in the first place. So we cannot attempt to truly and holistically abolish the system and address it without first acknowledging the reason why we were brought over here and working to unlearn a lot of the capitalistic tendencies that we have. A lot of people find value in emulating the master and his family. They want to live in the same house. They want to own plantations. It's not a matter of us freeing ourselves from them. It's a matter of shifting power from them to us. And I don't want to be in charge of anyone. I don't want to own people. I don't want to own mega mansions. I don't want anything that white people have been able to obtain after 400 years of oppressing people, because anything that will make you rape and pillage and plunder countries that I can't even pronounce in the Middle East, people here, indigenous people, Black people, that will make you terrorize our cultures and kill us for years is not worth having. So any young people out there, I'm strongly encouraging you, stay rooted in what our people learned and knew of prior to coming here, and how it takes a village to raise a child, how we can show up together as mutual aid, as our ancestors. And we don't have to rely on capitalism to sustain us and make us successful. So that's my main message for today.
Oh my goodness. I almost forget that we are not in person, because you're so powerful that we still feel your energy, through the miles. So right now we're going to take a moment to have a little bit of cultural activity, a little inspiring art to shift us and give people a moment to meditate on the heft of what you ladies brought to the table. And then we'll come back to our discussion of what you have going on and how we can be better supportive to the movements that you guys are heading.
Greetings again, family. Thank you so much for the phenomenal messages. Oh man, I can't tell you. I'm sitting over here forgetting I was supposed to go because I was all caught up in the moment. But this cultural presentation is Spirit and Sparrow. They are a sweet, non-binary mashup of Black magic, soul, funk, delicate lyrics, powerful harmonies, engaging musicianship, and they have a dynamic chemistry, combining the phenomenal energies of cellist, singer, healer, Spirit McIntyre, and multi-instrumentalist Key Slaughter. Spirit and Sparrow are musicians that seek to create sustainable music. It's a practice that's rooted in transparency, compassion, and love. This particular performance is from our celebration of the 2020 National Day of Racial Healing, which we will be celebrating again this coming Tuesday, January 19th. For more information, please visit our website at ashenola.org. But from now, please enjoy Spirit and Sparrow.
This is a song for the ancestors. Promise me that we don't meet again in this lifetime, you'll think of me. Promise me, if we don't meet again in this lifetime, you'll think of me sometimes and smile and smile. Promise me, if we don't meet again in this lifetime, you'll think of me sometimes and smile and smile and say you'll think of me sometimes, sometimes, sometimes. Say you'll think of me sometimes, sometimes, sometimes. If somebody remembers who you are and what you did, you'll live forever. You'll live forever. You'll live forever. Yes, if somebody remember who you are and what you did, you'll live forever. You'll live forever. You'll live forever. Say you'll think of me sometime, sometimes, sometimes. Say you'll think of me sometime, sometime, sometime. Praises be to
All right. A little beauty and calm to bring all of that fire and energy into perspective. I'm so excited to dig a little deeper into the themes and issues that you guys brought up today. Rosa, I went to Puerto Rico for the first time in October. I went because I just needed a mental health break at, dealing with all of the COVID, everything. And I knew, that the way the virus, the pandemic was being handled, in our islands was a lot safer, more human and thoughtful than what we're doing here. But when I went, I was not expecting to see all of the Black people I saw, right? Being a New Orleanian, being an American, quote unquote, as much as you try not to fall into the tropes and believe only what you see or learn from the oppressor, I was still astounded, by the range of people and experiences and neighborhoods and the art, and all of those things that were so close to, our own experience here in New Orleans. Like the neighborhood I stayed in, Carolina, was just like the Seventh Ward. Like literally the folks who were next door had a little girl that looked like my niece. And I was like trying to catch her to take a picture, like, look, this is her. And so what are the kinds of things, that we can do to, cross these artificial barriers? You brought up the womb removal that is still currently going on. As far as I know, the doctor who has been doing those atrocities have not been removed. I haven't seen any notice of that. He's unapologetic in his practices. Those women are still being subjected to brutal gang rapes by officers, and I literally think of them every single day. How do we help?
Help what? The women in ICE detention, or what's happening?
The women in ICE detention. How, as a Black American woman, do we cross the artificial barriers to put our hands on issues like these?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Puerto Rico, I just think the discussion in America around race is usually ethnically African American and European American in any situation, right? Like you never see Haitians or Ethiopians, people from the continent, people from the Caribbean. Like on a mainstream level, yes, in more independent media spaces, you'll find that. But Puerto Rico, by their census in 1860, 65% of the people in Puerto Rico were African descendant people. And that was really when the Spanish crown wanted to leave Puerto Rico, because it was no longer value to them around sugar stuff. The plantations were, there were rebellions, and they were being burnt down and things like that. And obviously the people of Puerto Rico wanted to get rid of the Spanish government. We overthrew the Spanish government, but then a year later, that's when the United States invades us. And ever since that invasion in 1898, we've been under the colonial rule of the United States. So the thing with Puerto Rico, you'll see a lot in what we know as Latin America. Anybody who, you're just not taught about race. Like when you're born Puerto Rican, that's who you are. You're Puerto Rican. Me living in the Bronx in the 70s and the 80s, like everybody there was Caribbean. So, everybody was Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, that's just how it was. But Puerto Rico right now is also becoming more, you're seeing younger African descendants repatriating back from the United States to Puerto Rico. So you went to Carolina, that's where my dad was born. His brothers and sisters born. That's also where Roberto Clemente was born. The baseball player. Anybody sees him, they're like, he's Black. Yeah, he's a Black Puerto Rican. So I think what we've been seeing the last 5 years, starting with Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. Schomburg, if people know the Schomburg library in
Yes.
Harlem. Arturo Schomburg was Black Puerto Rican. He was kicked out of Puerto Rico for fighting for independence. He then comes as the Harlem Renaissance growing, and then he also begins these social clubs of Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and like African-American brothers, Marcus Garvey, his wife, Anna Garvey, like they were all within the Harlem Renaissance, but they were pushing the Pan-Africanist ideology, right? So now what we have in these conversations in the United States, like still half the people don't know that Puerto Ricans are American, you know, just because you don't get taught that, you know. Second, there's this growing movement around Black and Puerto Rican, Black Latinx identity. You know, I've been identifying as a Black Puerto Rican for over 20 years. I'm still not welcomed in certain spaces. I still go to spaces where they're like, this is for non-Black, non-person of color who's not Black. I'm like, yo, I'm not even falling with, I don't get down like that. Black space, I'm gonna come in. If it's about Black Lives Matter, been in, you know, and also there's some spaces that specifically aren't for me, and I respect that. But the gist of my work in grassroots organizing, community building, and my academic work is around not just identifying as a Black Puerto Rican, but identifying with a Black political tradition that is radical. And because then there can be a line when a Puerto Rican says something anti-Black in my family, and I'm like, last time you'll be seeing me, I'm out. Or if someone in my community says something anti-Black. I think where the conversation has gone wrong is that now their anti-Blackness is being framed as something that Latinx people do, which is completely false. Does not show our history. It certainly doesn't talk about the Rainbow Coalition, you know, that Fred Hampton started. It doesn't talk about that there were Puerto Ricans who were in the Black Panther Party. There were Black people who were in the Young Lords. There were the White Patriots, the American Indian movement, you know, and that African-American community and the Puerto Rican community, we have the bulk of political prisoners that we've been fighting to get free.
Yep.
Right. So where I've seen the most closeness is around freeing our political prisoners. So Oscar Lopez gets free. That wasn't Obama giving him freedom. That was 20 years of a Jericho movement, political people being like, Oscar needs to be free. And so does Jalil Muntaquen, so does Mumia, so does Leonard Peltier. Yeah. That to me is why I find the most solidarity. And then lastly, the media doesn't help, right? And it doesn't help that this last week, we just found out that another white girl passed herself on as a Puerto Rican. And you know, I at first was like, yo, just cut her off. Until I started doing some reading, finding out she did 2 trainings at the CIA. And what I was writing last night, in this article, I said, yes, she's a problem, but now what she's done is exactly what counterintelligence wants us to do. Disruption and discord. Because right now, the Puerto Rican political community here and on the island is in tatters because of her deceit, because of how many places she came in. And the thing was like, I wasn't around her that much, and I'm always suspect of certain people. It's just my training from Malcolm X Grassroots, from our elders telling us like, yo, you know, but she's just caused so much disruption right now. And so what my ongoing work though will always be to uplift other sisters and brothers and non-binary folks that are claiming their Afro-ness or their Blackness as a quote Latino person. I told you before, I don't use the word Latinx. I hate it. But you know, when people ask me, I'm like, I'm a Black Puerto Rican and I'm trying to be free with Black people, you know, and really lastly, that there's no movement where Puerto Ricans have never been part of. Like when people like, why don't Latino people show up? What Latinos? Because you don't go to a protest in the United States of America where there's not Puerto Ricans, Haitians, Cubans, right? It's really easy for people to disregard what is actually happening and that there are movements and we've been in solidarity with each other, but also things fall apart. And a lot of times they fall apart because of an informant or disruptor and infiltrator.
Mm-hmm. I should. All right. Well, thank you for that. So, Keiajah, you said something that really struck me. That you are the last generation that will endure this. I mean, and how inspiring is that, knowing how long we have been enduring, right? Um, and the kinds of things that you are talking about dismantling, most particularly capitalism, um, are so entrenched, right? And we have all of these issues to deal with, but yet we're struggling with our young people, right? Yet we are alienating them and treating them in the same oppressive ways that we've experienced. What is your analysis of that? What do you think is the missing link between our generations?
I think there's a staunch willingness to unlearn and make space. A lot of our elders are taught that, respect your elders, and, I'm older than you, and that age difference automatically means I'm wiser than you, and you have so much more to learn from me, and there's nothing that I can gain to learn from you because of your age. And, I'm older, and a lot of people take everything from that mindset, and it honestly alienates a new generation of activists and organizers who know a lot. And like, we've been able to learn a lot. We have actively unlearned and are successfully unlearning a lot of what isolated a lot of Black queer people, a lot of Black trans people, a lot of Black non-binary people, a lot of people who weren't included in these movements originally, and who didn't feel seen by our previous representation. They didn't look at Malcolm X and Martin as a true representation of them as a Black queer person. So when people kind of get in their heads and kind of gatekeep, a willingness to unlearn is gatekeeping. It's holding the gate. It's taking up space from someone who is willing to unlearn at any age. There's no age in which progress cannot be made. There's no age in which you know so much. There's no amount of protests that I can go to where I can actively say that I don't need to read another book. I don't need to watch another video. I don't need to watch another, I know everything. So I think a lot of older people in this movement forget that, and they get accomplishments. They get, all of these different prizes and awards, and, Harvard this, Harvard that, and they think that they aren't able to learn or ever be in community with us. So we kind of have this class struggle, even in these own movements of the bourgeoisie, typically the grassroots organizers versus the grass tops organizations like the Urban League and the NAACP and the SCLC. And it's not intentional, but when we have people who are convinced that we're just young, rowdy protesters who, tag stuff and set stuff on fire, allegedly, then it becomes a matter of people not willing to learn and not willing to put aside their differences and just not willing to come together on one level. There's different levels of class, even in this movement, that I've seen manifest. Like, it's rich Black people in this movement. There's poor Black people. There's houseless Black people in this movement. So when we have that class struggle, even in our own movement, where people think that money absolves them of having to show up and they can slide a donation every year, and that absolves them of having to show up physically, then we will always have that divide and disconnect.
Yes, ma'am. Ooh, yes, you're giving me all kind of thoughts about work that needs to be done. Thank you for that. I want to ask one more question before I open it up to the audience, because I know they must be clamoring. I could feel them in my bones. But what both of you spoke of is this deep internalized white supremacy, right, that exists in us, as human beings in this context. We, are working against our own best interests all the time. And one of the places where I see this exhibited, and it's kind of my new, in my opinion, it's the White Walker. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Game of Thrones, but like it's the existential crisis that's happening while the rest everybody's, you know, fighting about BS. But the climate issue, right? The fact that our world, and in New Orleans, we're, you know, kind of ground zero for climate change. You know, everybody looks at us as the boot. If you look at an accurate map of Louisiana, we're more like a raggedy ankle sock, right? You know, a third of our land is gone. New Orleans itself, the physical land we're on, is expected to disappear within the next 20 years. If remediation and mitigation isn't instituted within the next 3 to 5 years. We're not even talking about it, right? Much less prepared to implement anything. And of course, as the folks that we are the most impacted by climate change, no matter where we are. In our cities, we're dealing with urban heat island effects and all of those things, air quality, water shortages, water poisoning, and that's around the globe. How do we join that existential crisis? And I'm asking this question to both of you. How do we join that? How do we infuse our movement and our activities with an eye on the climate justice issue along with the racial justice issue?
It's particularly hard for me. Like, I'm very aware, like I've always been very conscious of climate change. I was like in 7th grade and it was like, the earth is deteriorating at a rate faster. Like I remember like just watching all of this stuff. And as a child, hearing that the earth won't be around in 100 years and that we're tearing the earth up, there's like this sense of urgency. And like as I've grown up, I realized like there's a deeper sense of urgency. Like if I won't even live to see the earth even deteriorate, because I'm trying to fight the police, I'm trying to fight these white supremacists off, then how can I truly and holistically show up for the climate justice movement and ensure that we even live to even, you know, work to undo what capitalism has caused in our society? All of these environmental issues are a result of capitalism. It's a result of us. We have a carbon footprint of 20 tons here in America. Each American has 20 tons of a carbon footprint. So I am in solidarity with the Sunrise Movement around the country. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that organization. And just showing up for that, that's as much as I am willing to exert on the climate justice issues, because it's very dire, but it's kind of something that we don't see. It's something that's kind of in the background and it's looming, it's over our heads and we all know it, but we can't look up at the sun because we got to look at the officers kneeling at our people. So yeah.
Ashe, thank you for that perspective. And what about you, Rosa?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be disconnected from racial justice, but now with a just transition, with Sunrise, with Uprose, that's based in Brooklyn and run mostly by all women of color intergenerationally. And Uprose follows what they call the Jimenez principles for democratic organizing, right? And it's inclusive, bottom-up organizing, people speak for themselves, in solidarity and mutual aid, just relationship among ourselves, and commitment to self-transformation. So when I went to New Orleans after Katrina, I was like, and here it is, right? 2005, I saw it for myself. I saw horrific things like so many y'all down in New Orleans, so many bodies, the 9th Ward. I went subsequently 2 more times when we did that 1-year anniversary. With you were there, and the People's Hurricane Relief Movement and stuff. And then subsequent to that, Kali, who was a Kali and them doing the work with People's Hurricane, have now posted up in Jackson, Mississippi, and helped govern in Chokwe as the mayor. Unfortunately, Chokwe died when he, and then Antar, his son, is the mayor, but really Cooperation Jackson, right? Yeah, is exactly what we've been talking about, right? Like getting land grants, taking over abandoned buildings, farming, cooperative economics.
Yep.
So a lot of people will be like, where are folks? And I'm like, all you gotta do is Google, like they're there, or, you know, in this larger movement that there. I'm here in Albany, New York. We have Soulfire Farm near us. And Soulfire Farm, their programs are like the #1 on the ground programs. The sister who created Soulfire Farm is Leah Penniman. And she has a sister who has a farm on the other side, about an hour away from where Leah's farm. So for us here in Albany, we go to Soulfire Farm a lot. Used to, before the pandemic, to put our hands in the ground. To get the food shares out to people in the summer when they don't have food to eat. But also my daughter, as a young person, has been involved in 3 of their youth training. And what I saw transform in her was like a love of land and, you know, digging your hands into the dirt and stuff. For me, that was how my mom raised us. Like my mom would always take us somewhere. She'd take us, like, look at that waterfall, look at the mountain, get in the ocean. That's a starfish, you know, put your hand in the dirt, learn how to grow stuff. I think where we're at, though, is that if we don't go full hard on transitioning into a green economy, right, we're not going to survive the planet disruption that is happening, right? You know, so I know that a lot. If my daughter's 16, she's not petrified, but she's like, y'all messed up everything. And a global pandemic. So
that's fact.
She's like, we got the plans. And I'm like, give me the plans. I'll do whatever. But I'm always around young people. That to me, because we speak about this intergenerational way of conflict, but I have relationships with 90-year elders and I have relationship with 8-year-old kids, but that's always how I've been. And I'm more critical on my generation and things that we didn't do. You know, I'm not critical of young people, not critical of elders. I'm like, look at my generation and how did we become the generation that told everybody if you work at a nonprofit, you're set for life. And also, you know, the last thing, if we don't talk about capitalism, then you really can't talk about climate justice or racial justice. And if people aren't seeing through COVID, it's like, the reason they're forcing people to work is capitalism.
That's right.
And now the reason they're going to have to keep people home is like mad workers are dying, mostly Latino and African American. 25 million jobs lost to automation. But those 25 million jobs could become green jobs.
That's right.
When I went after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, I saw 2 things and I was like, okay, we're moving forward. First, the young people that were like, we are not listening to no government anymore. Y'all ain't bringing us nothing. We will do for self. Mutual aid communities all over Puerto Rico to this day. And second, asking and now implementing, first asking, we're an island. We do not need an electrical grid. So instead of rebuilding the electrical grid, they're now moving into you know, solar power energy. So that's giving the people of Puerto Rico like a high self-determination. And also young people have been taking over the land and growing farms.
Yeah.
And so it's happening and the young people are doing it and it's fantastic.
That is fantastic and wonderful. And, you know, ties back to the points that you have both made about you know, really dismantling this capitalist system. And, you know, and I'm just encouraging us to be bold and visionary in how we do that. And Rosa, your earrings, of course, are, you know, bringing all kind of feels. And that's a personal hero of mine. I'm going to send you a little something that you might enjoy if you are a Harry Queen Adamanta fan. And before I, you know, go deeper with you guys, I do want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions, but I haven't. Team Morgan Wood, do we have any questions from the live? Because if not, I'm about to take these last 15 minutes. Y'all hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, can hear you now.
Thank you. My mic was still on a different setting from showing the video. But I was saying we have folks who were on the webinar who have been posting comments and questions in the chat. So we have commentary that way. I know I've seen some things. The most recent thing I saw was re-entering the Paris Agreement.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yes, okay, so
Yes. So y'all see, we don't have any
I see what
questions.
you see is what you're telling me. You don't have anything else on the Facebook. Like, where you at on Facebook?
A lot of good affirmations of everything we're saying.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful affirmations. And knowing that we're in here with aligned folks is very encouraging. Oh, you're right. And quoting y'all definitely I've been writing as y'all were talking. I'm like, y'all gonna have some quotables. Y'all gonna see my next newsletters coming out with y'all's words in them. Okay, so talking about things like the Paris Agreement and just the Black radical traditions, and in capitalism in general, because of course that is not just an American problem. It's a Western thought problem. They made it a global problem, right, by instituting it in all of our lands. Where do you guys see like the glimmers of hope, the kinds of, and Rosa, you mentioned a bit of this with some of the communities that you're working with, and but what is the thought process that captures people, that inspires rather than manipulates the way that capitalism does, but captures people and holds their commitment, holds their interest, and enthralls them, in the way that capitalism does. KJ, as you were talking, I was like, yes, denouncing capitalism in all its forms. Yes, all of this brand enslavement. How can we make folks not want the bag?
I feel like a lot of it is political education and unlearning. When in the 1960s,
describe what you mean by unlearning.
We as a people have been taught, like even in slavery times, like Sunday's best was typically things that white people wore, and we still call our Sunday outfits Sunday's best. So we've been pretty much taught that imitating master and his family is liberation, and brands is liberation, and 1920s when Black people were wearing furs and driving fancy cars, and Black Wall Street, we were taught that is liberation. And I'm definitely in favor of Black people owning businesses. I own a business myself, but I never want to get too engrossed in capitalism that I forget that there are human suffering, and I forget our own struggles. We see oftentimes when a lot of Black people rise to prominence, they forget the average struggles. All of these rappers in the 90s who were average everyday Joes just like us are now enthralled with Trump and supporting his tax policies, because there's either two people. There's the poor person who knows what it's like to be poor and wants to ensure that they never go through that again. So they're willing to do anything at any cost to make sure that they never experience poverty again. And then there's poor people like us who knows what it's like to be poor, and we're willing to do anything to make sure that other people are not poor. So many times I watch all these interviews with these different rappers who are my age who talk about, yeah, I used to get evicted. I used to get put out all the time. We didn't have no money growing up. And you would think that the fight or flight response to that would be, let's show up. We have millions of dollars at our disposal. Let's not go and throw $1 million at a strip club on a Saturday. Let's go invest that in our communities. And a lot of people don't have that mindset. So unlearning is knowing our history and knowing where we came from. We had such prominent political figures in the 1960s and 70s in American capitalism, and I wholeheartedly believe it was intentional. They slowly but surely started to replace our political leaders with, Marvin Gaye, Good Times, Michael Jackson. Like, look at all these entertainers you guys have. You're not enslaved anymore. Michael Jackson is the biggest artist in the world, and he looks like you. So we got so far from dire need that back in the 60s, it was like now or never. It was like, we need our rights and we need them now. MLK just got assassinated. We need y'all to fix this now. But because we don't have that dire need and we have so much representation, a lot of people think that we've made so much more progress. And as a matter of fact, I believe it would be even harder to achieve liberation today than it would back in the 60s, because they didn't have anything to lose. These rappers won't even sign on to a petition as much as it, like, as long as it, just to not interfere with any contracts or promotions or anything that they might have going on. So it's just about recognizing our worth outside of what we have to offer and outside of what we can obtain, and uplifting people who don't post $100,000 bags in the middle of a global pandemic. When we stop glorifying and idolizing all of these celebrities who haven't even shown up in the basic capacities for their own communities, then we'll start to get somewhere. And I definitely feel a powerful shift coming. I was talking about this on Twitter, because anything a random celebrity does now becomes trending. Like, I remember a few weeks ago, Cardi B was talking about like a hangover or something, and it was trending. And that shows like how much our celebrity culture is dying and dwindling to where anything that they do is trending. And it shows that people are starting to lose interest. People are starting to really focus on self and focus on community, especially after this awakening of the pandemic, where we've watched the most prominent among us be completely insensitive and tone deaf about a lot of issues. Diddy said, if this year hadn't brought out the hustle in you, it's not in you, as if hundreds of thousands of people haven't died and people have become unemployed and evicted. So we're almost there. It's just one last push is needed. We're almost there.
Yeah, and I thought of a push as you were speaking when you said, you know, like our artists won't even sign on to petitions, like our culture bearers, like the artists who's supposed to represent, you know, everything that's in us, and they can get nothing happens to them. They won't lose any, you know, contracts for debasement of their women, their community, their mama, themselves, but agree with a political movement, right? Go ahead.
No, you know, look, I work with so many artists. What I tell people first is artists are not politicians. Like, you know,
they're not, but they're
some are.
humans.
Some are.
So,
as an
like,
artist.
a lot of people say that in rebuttal is like, they're not activists. You can't expect them to show up as activists, but I expect them to show up as people. Like, we're human beings and we should, okay.
What I'm saying is, as many artists as I have worked, or there are a lot of artists who are consistently there. The artists that get promoted on social media would be someone like Ice Cube and his ridiculousness, right? But there were many other hip hop artists, there were many other cultural workers, poets, and all that not only called him on that, are part of organizations of supporting them and supporting what's there and not wanting to be in the spotlight. The people, so the people you see in the spotlight are the multimillionaires, multi-billionaires, Dr. Dre, P. Diddy, Ice Cube, you know.
Right, who bought into the institutional.
But also they get the bulk of the media, right?
Yeah.
So do you want it, okay, is CNN gonna book 50 Cent or is CNN gonna book Ursula Rucker? Is CNN gonna book Ice Cube and talk about it and all the other shows, or are you going to talk about Jessica Care Moore? You see, so
and those folks won't even get, you know, the same kinds of contracts and things like that. So the point I was going to make is that our pressure, as opposed to being on the artist, should be on the music companies or whatever, you know, the corporations, you know.
I did that work for so long, I moved away from that work. And one of the reasons is like, you cannot expect Disney to give you a movie deal about the Move family, like, or Black Liberation Army. That shit ain't gonna happen.
No, not at all. But what we can do is demand that they don't put those kinds of clauses in artist contracts that prohibit them from, you know, taking part in justice movements, because that.
And me personally, as like, it's not even acting like asking people like, what's just irritating to me is that we didn't have to beg people to show up in the 60s and the 70s. Muhammad Ali said, like, if I lose a fight, like, we had Nina Simone, like, it was just our celebrities that we had back then were more vocal and showed up a lot more than the people that we have now, because they're not willing to sacrifice a deal or sacrifice fans. Like, coming out and saying Black Lives Matter 4 years ago would have not been popular to a lot of these rappers with huge followings, and a large majority of that following is white suburban kids.
But I don't care about rappers. That's what I don't really, that was my whole point. I was just naming a couple examples of artists, but James Brown was forced to say, I'm Black and I'm proud, because there was a Black Panther Party movement, right? There was, the Black Panthers were around. He didn't one day say, I'm Black and I'm proud. It was Panthers like, yo, you need to stop writing this and write something that's affirmative for the people. The flip side of that is that 99% of these people are not willing to take any risks. We can all agree on that.
People, period, right?
But there are also many artists, and I'm not talking about rappers. Like, rappers are not our only artists. I'm talking about people who are, who do art, who are poets, who are writers. In every generation, it exists.
Yeah. So that is very true. But I think the point we're making here, Rose, is like those folks, those artists, they are not by far the totality. I mean, music, period, is not the totality of who we are as
mainstream artists.
But those that have that, that have that influence, how could we move that influence, to our direction?
They won't be moved. That's what KJ's talking about. They won't be moved. So then if you know that, fuck it, keep it moving. You gotta keep moving within your community.
Like, I'm not willing to let people off the hook any longer.
That I understand.
I tried that. Everyone was like, oh, don't focus on who doesn't show up. Why not? Why are we valuing them and their art, and why are we giving them platforms if they can't speak on somebody getting killed in their own city? Like, why aren't we holding the NBA accountable for a one-day walkout when it's like members of the WNBA who have quit basketball to engage in activism?
I am not.
So why are we allowing bare minimum behavior? I'm not arguing. I'm just talking at this point. So why are we allowing the bare minimum from?
Oh, KJ is telling us that your network bandwidth is low, so hopefully you will join us back in when you can, because we have a question about what is your business. I would love folks to answer, and there's a question that Sui Diep asked that I think ties directly into the conversation that we've been having, and it's not an argument. This is how Black women talk to each other, right? This is how we how we get down. Yeah, but
I agree with what I agree with what KJ was saying about the accountability piece.
Yeah.
What I was going to say to that is that I think that young people are doing a lot better again than my generation did around the accountability piece, and then I'm also obviously being about to be 50, that for me is not the work I want to do. Like, I'm not going to be the person like holding every rapper, performer, artist accountable, because
and not only that, for this group of artists, you're not their audience, you're not the person who's consuming them. So I think the point she's making is that we as the consumers of this have to make demands on them, which I agree with, and I think ties into Sui's question of how do we navigate a system that tries to censor us in our advocacy. And so we can agree that we're censored across all platforms, all institutions, ways of being. What are your thoughts on navigating censorship of advocacy efforts?
It's just pressing forward. Like, a lot of people make it harder than what it actually is. It's just a matter of people not willing to give up capital, not willing to yield what societal privilege that they have for anybody's benefit except their own. Because when 21 Savage was arrested, everyone, Jay-Z and the Black Lives Matter movement, everyone showed up for him unapologetically, and all my timeline was hashtag free 21 Savage. He's an immigrant and he's Black and he deserves to be here. And I'm like, there's millions of Black immigrants who deserve to be here, but you only want to yield all the privilege and power that you have in favor of the people that matter to you, instead of like deciding that all of us matter and all of us need that time and attention and platform to be able to be liberated. So it's definitely just pressing forward. Like a lot of what Kyrie Irving attempted to do in the summer was a strike. Like, we're not going to keep playing if they won't value our lives. And I really felt like the mainstream media, unfortunately, although we have our own community members, they are seen as the Black community. They speak for all of us. They don't default to me when something goes on. They default to Cardi B. So unfortunately, they don't default to me. So it's the responsibility of those who are forced as our representatives to represent us unapologetically and correctly, and not stifle our movement and message on account of them wanting capital and privilege. And so it's just showing up unapologetically. I really felt like one of the most influential, if not the most influential form of protest is a strike, and a strike by NFL, NBA players in which Black people make up the majority of, and saying, we won't play another game until y'all stop killing us. And honestly, I think we would never see policy change quicker, because our politics and our businesses are so deeply intertwined. All that Mark Cuban has to do is say, my players aren't playing on the Dallas Mavericks right now because your officers are killing their people in Dallas, Texas. And you would never see these chiefs of police I swear to God, if you shoot a Black person, I swear to God, don't touch him. So a lot of people don't realize how much political power that we truly have, and just how many people aren't willing to come up off that power. They don't want to. The NBA, they make so much money a year. They have enough to survive at this point, and they won't even do the bare minimum. All they do is, I'll paint the courts, I'll wear a shirt, I'll do everything performative instead of sacrificing something that's truly tangible, a salary. Whereas WNBA players went against their own team owner in Georgia, and was able to win Warnock that seat on account of them openly saying, like, we don't support Kelly, we don't support her, and she's our team owner. And they were able to flip Georgia as a result of that. So until people come with the same energy and decide that enough is enough, we're going to keep encountering the same things, and nothing is going to change.
Well, one thing that Black women have never been accused of is not being bold and courageous, right? Two quick questions before I have to let you go, because let me tell you though, if y'all want to stay and talk, I will do it, but I do know I have only reserved your time for a limit, and we have passed it, so thank you for your graciousness. Yeah, but just really quick. Mind. Okay, good, thank you. KJ, what is your business? Gentel wants to know.
I just secured an LLC. It's called Black Radical Tradition Clothing. And it'll be a t-shirt and apparel company in which a portion of proceeds from every item will go to grassroots organizers and organizations across the country. And I can show y'all, I just got this shirt yesterday too. I can show y'all a quick snippet. A lot of it is very radical ideology, and it's very blatant, but it's for a good cause, and we're just going to stay rooted in that. That's one of our first designs. My grandmother was not very happy to see this at all. She nearly had a Holy Ghost fit. She was like, Keiajah, your uncles used to be police officers, but we're still going to press on with our designs. And yeah, we're just going to show up for our grassroots organizers and organizations how a lot of the grass tops organizers and organizations show up for each other. So
excellent, beautiful. Well, count us in as big supporters. Rosa, you mentioned, as you're approaching 50 and, how you're looking at, the next phase of your work and your organizing. And, I'm approaching as well. And like, and I look at KJ and I remember that fire, right? And then now with my 5 children and, all of the other responsibilities, my fire is not, so much so volatile in the ways that I would like it to be. But as I'm looking ahead and thinking how I can build my controlled fires, I would love to hear about what is on your horizon.
Yeah, first, KJ, that's great that you have your own business. I have my own business, my sister and my brother, because my father had his own business and kind of passed down that idea of like, I work for myself, and it's extremely hard. It's hard, And I wanted to say, when you brought up Kyrie Irving, which is very interesting for people who don't know the backstory, it was Barack Obama called and spoke to them. And then LeBron and a couple of the other ones were like, well, we got to go back on that court, where Kyrie Irving wasn't trying to go back. So for people to understand even more what KJ was saying around, because a lot of us thought that, right? Like, this is performative. Like, how is Amazon saying Black Lives Matter but firing Black workers? Then it's our responsibility to support that. When they fired that brother Chris Smalls and they leaked the audio of the entire Amazon executive leadership spending thousands of dollars to figure out how they could stop him. Now he's gone on to start the Congress of Workers. Has been doing, his name is Chris Smalls, 24, And I was like, yeah, that's the fire we need right now.
Yeah.
You need unapologetic radical people, because the height of social media visibility, a lot of these cats be thinking that their visibility is power. No, that's power for you and your people. It's not power. It's not redistributed. You're not talking about redistributing the wealth, then we're not talking about power. For me, I've hit this crossroads because I spent the last 3 years working on a movie about the life of Fred Hampton. Ryan Coogler produced it. Charles Keane and his brother Shaka produced and directed. So being reconnected back to Fred Hampton, the son, who lives in Chicago, these 3 years of making the movie, it's about to come out already. People are critiquing it. I'm like, it's a biopic. It's not a documentary. I know everybody, I was talking to him last night and I said, I'm in this place where I am doing some really deep internal reflection and wanting to leave more and more the public sphere that I'm in, i.e. not posting so much, knowing that every space is not for me, knowing if that space is not for me, if I want to support it, how can I support it by giving it resources? But my friend wrote this and I copied it. And I was like, this is how I'm waking up every day. So she says, to ask before responding or engaging, ask yourself these 4 questions. Is this essential for me or my family, my people's survival? Is it my responsibility? What will be my sacrifice? Will engaging unnecessarily disrupt my peace in any way? And can someone else who is more deeply invested do it? And that last one for me is what I've been doing the last year. Finding younger, particularly women and trans and queer folks that identify as Afro or Black Latina. Like, I don't have to do every podcast. I may be an expert on the field, but I don't have to do every interview. I don't have to do that. And it's just like a check, like, girl, first, I'm a little tired right now. I'm trying to write a dissertation with all of this, and I'm tired, but also that's what was done for me by elders. Once I studied with them, there was that moment where they were like, go, it's you now. We already taught you, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna be good, go, push. you know, and that for me is the most important stuff, because my daughter is also, I've raised her as a movement baby, unlike I was raised, right? But I also had to begin to find the balance for her, where it's like, oh, she just wants to hang out with her friends tonight. She doesn't want to go to the BM rally tonight, but she'll go to the one tomorrow.
Yeah.
So for me, that's where I'm at. I want to write more. I want to process everything that has gone from Ferguson down. And lastly, I'm trying to be very supportive of the frontline people in Ferguson who have been abandoned, who have been used, who people are writing books, getting grants, getting philanthropy, getting millions of dollars, while these Ferguson frontline warriors, T-Dub, Rika, Tefpo, so many of them, not only did they lose 3 of their brothers, which we all know they were killed by the police in some way, the movement, if there's a movement, has completely abandoned them, and they're young. And I was like, nah. So I purposely reconnected, and I'm building with them, or whatever they need for me to do, because I was like, this is some craziness. How are people getting $50 million grants, saying Ferguson, and cats don't have health care and could be houseless? I was like, I'm not going to be the one in my generation to do that to any younger people. I was never that person, but I'm definitely not that person, which then means I just left a lot of toxic spaces of people in my generation, a little older, like, I can't deal with the toxicity anymore. It's time now. Do you write, process your daughter, and support young people in what they want to do. My business, I'm a public speaker. I spend most of my time on the road, except for this last year, been mostly on Zoom, and I do some media stuff, and I do a show once in a while, things like that. Somebody asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
and that 50 mil is why we have such a deep beef with the Grass Tops org, at least like from where, like from my perspective, as like I'm tapped into like almost every city, like a lot of different cities, a lot of different young organizers, is like we're facing eviction. Like I don't even have healthcare. Like there's 12,000 different things going on, and we knew we did a lot of pocket watching this past summer, so we knew the amount of funds that they were getting from these giant corporations who were looking to absolve themselves of guilt and all this other things. So we're just like, dang, we're here in the front lines, getting protested, getting arrested, and the bare minimum that people can offer us is to pay our bail, which, you know, and then they kind of leave us to thug it out, and they'll maybe get our car out of tow.
Paying your bail, your rent, your health care. Like, I mean, come on, what are we doing?
We show up so unapologetically and so boldly,
and so put your entire body on the line. You put your lives on the line. You put your well-being and your future, you know.
No therapy, they don't cover therapy, you know. At least you know, slide me some therapy costs. Like we had, like we even now, like I was talking with young DC organizers, and we were just like kind of like laughing about all of the trauma that we face at the hands of the police, but laughing is kind of the only mechanism that a lot of us have. We don't have access to healthcare. I can't just call up, you know, someone and just say like, hey, I need a therapist or whatever. So instead of like yield what you have to benefit other people. Like I tell them, like any young organizer on me, like I'll plug your Cash App, I'll plug your GoFundMe, just let me know and I'll do it. And a lot of people don't have that energy. It's the nonprofit industrial complex.
That is exactly what I was gonna say. Like, this is the book I'm reading right now, trying to figure that very subject out. The revolution will not be funded, right?
Okay, I'm ordering that.
I'll send it to you.
Oh yes. Wow, I love
That'll be my pleasure, along with a couple of other things. And so, which I can't see that one, Rosa. What does it say?
The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power.
This is Jared Ball's new work, because you know there's so much talk around Black capitalism, and you're like capitalism. But this, everybody, you can actually go to his site, I Mix What I Like, and download it for free.
Okay,
bad. Ooh, the revolution will not be funded. Okay.
Yeah. And I was just gonna say, KJ, it's kind of like a double trauma, because you know you have the trauma of dealing with the supremacy and fighting that, but then to be commodified and then abandoned by your own folks, right? That has got to be traumatic as well. Rosa, would you mind typing into the chat the name of that book for folks? And so like this makes me start to think about, you know, some solutions and some actions, and really some phone calls I need to be making, you know.
We need jobs. Like we love organizing.
Well, you should be paid to be an activist. Like, how can we get that fund going, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But no, there's like brunches and all this other stuff that takes precedent over, like, and then, you know, after I get my basic needs met, like anything past that is mutual aid. It's an overage. I don't need it. So yeah, definitely, like I ain't even gonna get started on that, because
get started. What you gonna get started on?
They done, like, we kind of get like are the poster kids for activism, and these different news outlets come like Vice and take up so much space and like infiltrate, well, I won't say infiltrate, but like kind of invite themselves in our spaces and make millions off of these YouTube videos and all of this exclusive content, and we don't see a dime. They demand our labor, and like I'm definitely willing to show up for like youth organizations, or like it depends on the occasion, but outside of that, I believe that the like asking for labor of Black people without payment, that's slavery. So anytime that is something that I'm not willing to give, like if it's youth, I'm definitely willing to give, because I was just a youth, like I'm technically still a youth. But yeah, especially after I went viral, I just watched the amount of like celebrities and like all these national activists who were kind of like getting a lot of attention and clout off of the video and all this like a hysteria around protecting me or whatever. And like as I reflect, I never try to take up too much space. I never try to draw too much attention to myself. But like after I went viral, I was actively getting tailed like by KCPD. So, and then I'm very vocal. If you go on my Facebook, like for months, anytime I meet an officer, anytime I encounter an officer, I always go live. I'm always vocal. They did this on this day at that time. And it just so happened to go viral again. And it's just like a consistent commodification of me and other activists like Tiana Arata. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but in California on this past summer, she was arrested for organizing one protest, and she has 13 charges as a result of it. And I was just talking to her, and we both just had like a lot of common ground of like a lot of the activists and celebrities who showed up and like hashtag free Tiana, hashtag like hashtag protect me and all this other stuff. And then when the cameras left and when, you know, people started to care less and less, it was just like, well, I guess y'all are ass out now. Like, and I never want to maintain like a bunch of media attention. That's not my goal. But activists actively need protection, and it's harmful for people to constantly come in this movement and use us for music videos and interviews and all these cool behind the scenes of Black Lives Matter videos, and then dip out, because when they dip out, they take all that attention with them, all the resources with them, and we're now left even more susceptible to police violence because we done brought Vice to Kansas City. Yeah, we done brought them attention, and they leaving, and they're going to forget about our existence. What's stopping them from beating us up? Like nothing. So it's just a whole lot that needs to be addressed, and a lot of harm reduction and accountability that needs to be held in this movement. Like, why do Black cishet men take up so much space in this movement? Like, why do people always default to them for opinions and articles? And like the bane of like the articles I've gotten have been female centered publications, like Teen Vogue, Essence. Like they're not male centered orgs or anything like that. So it's just about sharing space and not taking up so much space from other people. And you know, I take up space, and I'm content with how much I take up, because I don't take up space from other Black women or ever attempt to. So
And you
about
bring
holding
so
people
many
accountable.
other people into the space when you speak, right? There's a difference between taking up space, right? And expanding space. So I don't consider what you or Rosa, what I or so many of our compatriots do is taking up space. Like, we're expanding the space. We're pushing it open for more people to be able to walk through and with and among us. And like, I see so much potential here for a collaboration. So I'm going to be calling y'all outside of this to, be thought partners and maybe implementation partners, if you are willing, in something that we can do to provide some level of direct support to our folks who are out there putting their bodies and their lives and futures on the line for the sake of our dignity, for the sake of our equity, right?
I saw a marvelous idea from the DC organizing space. They posted a mutual aid fund for organizers to tap into. And, it's not an oppression Olympics as to who gets the most or anything. It's just trying to ensure that we all don't end up out on the street while fighting for people out on the street. So I definitely plug that. I don't know. It's just hard to navigate constantly being told, if you thank you for showing up, and then anything that happens after that thank you is on account of you. I'm so thankful. I'm so happy that y'all protest 8 times a week for us. Just thank y'all. But then when it's time, dang, I'm facing eviction, it's well, maybe you should have been door dashing and not protesting. Maybe you should have been in your bag more. Don't be mad because you broke. Ain't nobody asked you to do all that. It's just a contradictory, terrible.
You get those kind of comments from people?
Oh, honey. Oh, when I had my Cash App in my bio ever since I can remember. Nobody really cared about it when I had 1,100 followers. But now that I have 300,000 plus, it's you're a grifter, you're trying to get rich off the movement, you thief, this, that, and the third. And I never ask, it's if you feel it in your heart to give, I definitely could use it. And any overage will definitely go to a houseless person, out on the street. I don't just hoard wealth. So a lot of people, it's a terrible space to be in, especially as a young activist. And I'm subject to so many criticisms, so many people's opinions kind of exerted on me to where I could be actively out on the street and I still wouldn't feel comfortable enough to share that plight because of how many people it's a lot of COINTELPRO that they don't even know that they're doing, the constant slandering and bashing of activists. I've been called an agent. I've been called so many things, and I just got a name for myself in activism. So it's just we're subjected to so much violence and hatred over the internet, and it's enough to make you want to quit. But I'm I'm not going to let the opinions of a few outshine everyone else's values and the fight for our lives. I don't take anything that they say personally. I'm at this point, it has to be a cop. Why KJ is a Fed? They kind of ingrain that grifter, that Fed, that agent thing into the movement space so that people lose faith in us. If they don't even think that Shaun King is Black, I won't even talk about him at all. But I'm if they don't think he's Black, if I pop up out of nowhere, although I've been putting in work in Kansas City and I'm an agent and all this other stuff, there's no leaders. There will be no faith held in people. And it's a terrible space to be in. I cherish having a platform, but if I post it, I'm posting it for clout. If I don't post it, it's not happening. I'm not doing nothing for my community. I'm a fake, I'm a fluke, all this other stuff. So it's actively just trying to navigate this terribly new space that, a lot of people didn't have a platform at 20 years old that I have. So it's just trying to learn a lot really quickly.
Rosa, real quick, because I know I do have to let y'all go because now I'm almost to a half an hour. But as a journalist and an activist, how did you weather it?
Oh, I mean,
continuing to weather it.
Yeah, I've been through all of that. I think it just comes with age, and I have 100% belief in what I do. you know, some of my friends will be like, yo, if mad people don't like you. I was like, yeah, but they respect you. But they respect you because you have integrity.
That's right.
And out of people of my generation, anybody in 1969 to 1984 born, I would say in that large movement space, people know me. They know what I've done. They know what I'm committed to. They know that when I get on the ground, the reporting I'm going to do. You know, and I stay the course. And really, because for me, my elders are the political prisoners. And we've had so many of them come out after a 30-year struggle, you know, and just staying connected to them. Like, how the hell did you spend 50 years in jail and now you come out and you just ready to go hard? You know, so for me, it's integrity and principles. And no one can say I don't have them, you know, and
That's
also
for sure.
to cut out toxicity, which I've been really good at the last couple of years, just being like, you know, this relationship is toxic. This relationship has been transactional, the other person. Why did you like, no, I don't want those type of relationships. There's this brother, his name is Kemba. He's a hip hop artist that came up through this collective when a bunch of us were still living in the Bronx in New York City. He started coming to the collective at 14. He's 30 now. His name is Kemba. And he has my favorite song. And he goes, ain't nobody I could trust. Life gets shorter every day. My circle gets closer every day. And I play it every day, just like there's no need to have 50, 60, what acquaintances, all of that, people calling you for you to do things, then using you. And part of that is I had to check in with myself and really go deep into like trauma from the past. And what I did find out going to therapy is that I've always been a people pleaser. I didn't know how to say no. And then when I didn't say no, then I complained about the thing I said yes to.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Well, that's a beautiful message
Yeah.
for all of us, you know, in our activism, but just in our humanity, in our daily walk, in our a reminder that our care for all begins with our care for self, right?
And valuing of yourself.
And valuing of yourself, and knowing that everything that you do and you give is a sacrifice. And so in the spirit of what has been shared with us today, what has been shared with us throughout our tradition from our leaders, particularly the ones we are highlighting, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the formidable César Chavez. I would like to thank you, Rosa, and thank you, KJ, for not just giving all of yourself to this conversation, of course, but giving all of yourself every day to us as a collective people. I appreciate you. I honor you, and I definitely look forward to the opportunity to connect and work with you again. I want to thank everybody who has joined us and who stuck with us. This is how you know how engaging this conversation is. You hardly nobody's trying to leave. And I know y'all got to go back to work. But I saw Baba Ram Bashé in here, one of our great New Orleans artists who reminded us that don't confuse the entertainers with the artists. We got Jose Torres Tama in here, one of our, you know, most invigorating activist artists. You know, so we have Javier Pedrosa, who's been giving great comments and support all along.
That's my homie. I just met Javier. He lives in New York City and does really great work. Yeah. We just connected about 2 months ago.
Great to meet you too, Javier. And I have a couple of our Ashe board members on here, so thank y'all for joining us. Thank you to the Ashe staff for helping us to put this together. And onward and upward, y'all. We have a full month of great conversations, and I could not think of a better one to get us started and get us rooted in the year that we have ahead of hard work, struggle, and winning. So thank you, ladies, women. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing y'all again real soon. Ashe.
Thank you, Ashe. Thank you so much.
Everybody stay safe.